So the Ultimate Fighter Season 28 finale occurs this Friday, November 30th at the Paul Concert Theater at Palms Casino Resort. And the main event, which is the fight we're going to be talking about right now, it's going to be a prediction and analysis video, involves Kamaru, the Nigerian Nightmare Usman, facing against former lightweight champion Rafael Dos Anjos in the welterweight division, where it's presumed that the winner definitely steps up in competition and gets one step closer to fighting for a welterweight title. Now, before we get down to the breakdown and looking back at the history of these two fighters and their metrics, I always ask you guys to make sure you comment, like, and subscribe. But most importantly, what I do ask you guys to do today is leave a comment on who you think is going to win. Do you think Usman will be able to, get the victory over Dos Anjos? Or do you think RDA can get right back in there and fight for a title? Make sure you leave your comment down below because winner gets chosen for a shout out in my next video. But you don't care about that. Let's just get right into the analysis, the breakdown, starting off with the Nigerian Nightmare, Kamaru Usman. He is 31 years old, trains at Hard Knock 365. Of course, he's a welterweight. He holds a professional record of 13 wins, 1 losses, where 8 of those victories came via KO or TKO. That is around 46%. He has 6 decisions and only 1 submission victory, and his only loss was a submission loss. Now, before we dive into Kamaru Usman, I gotta say that it's obvious that this guy's style is ground and pound mixed with grit wrestling. Now, I don't know how that's going to affect Rafael Dos Anjos. He seems to have a decent chance and has fought properly against wrestlers most of the time, but sometimes he does lose quite significantly because of that aspect of the game. But when we dive into Kamaru Usman, what is there really to look about? We look early in the career, yeah, he got caught by Jose Caceres via rear naked choke. That was his second fight ever, and that was back in 2013. That is almost, 9 years ago. And since then, he went on to get very, very impressive victories at LFC, got into the Ultimate Fighter house, where he was able to win via arm triangle choke back in 2015 against Hader Hassan. And since then, he's been on a tear within this welterweight division. He has wins over Leon Edwards, who, if you don't remember, just recently got a victory over Donald Cerrone. He has wins over Alexander Yakovlev, Warlley Alves, Sean Strickland, Sergio Moraes, Emil Meek, and of course his most recent victory back in May was against Damian Maia. Now, something that I do have to point out with Kamaru Usman is how active he is as a fighter, especially in the last 3 to 2 years. If you look at 2016, he's fought 2 times against Warlley and Alexander. After that, he fought 2 more times against Sean and Sergio Moraes. But this time around, he is fighting for the 3rd time in 2018 against very game-ready opponent. Emil Meek. A lot of people were hyped about this fighter. A lot of people thought that he looked good, that he had the skill set. And then he had nothing to show against Kamaru. And especially with Damian Maia, yes, it's another decision victory. Yes, Kamaru does have a lot of decision victories. But a factor a lot of people may overlook is that the Damian Maia fight went all 5 rounds, meaning not only did Kamaru Usman have what it takes to beat Damian Maia on the ground, who is a very prolific submission, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist, probably one of the best in the world, best ever in mixed martial arts, but he was able to make sure his cardio was up to pace and up to par of what is required to fight in those championship rounds. So, what I do have to say about Kamaru Usman is that he has a lot of good tools with him. He has the cardio, he has the wrestling, which in a lot of sense is one of the best aspects to start your wrestling or to start your mixed martial arts career, because it's such a good tool to use, and a lot of people lack that wrestling and grappling aspect. Kamaru Usman hasn't really shown lots of weaknesses in his game. There's not really that stands out there. His striking definitely is the weaker side, but to pinpoint that as a significant hole, I'm not too sure. I feel like Kamaru Usman can definitely couple his striking with his wrestling to get what he needs to do, and that is the victory. But let's flip over to his opponent, and this is probably one of the greatest fighters to ever step into the octagon, in my opinion. We have Rafael Dos Anjos, of course, fighting from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He stands at 5 foot 9 inches tall. He is 170 pounds, holds a significant record of 28 wins with 10 losses. former lightweight champion. You know, this guy has looked phenomenal in the lightweight division, was able to gain the lightweight title, defended, and then when he went to welterweight, he looked even better. Although he had that setback against Colby Covington, prior to that, he was on a tear, defeating 3 of the best welterweights that the division have to offer. But before I dive into the later part of his career, let's look at this illustrious, just scrolling down, look at all these matches that this man has had within the UFC organization. And of course, you know, at the beginning, it didn't look pretty. His first 2 fights, he lost. He lost to Jeremy Stephens and Tyson Griffin. Nothing wrong with that. Those are 2 great fighters, especially Jeremy Stephens. And, you know, even his first fight ever was a split decision loss. So, adversity is nothing new to Rafael Dos Anjos, because after those 2 losses, he was able to come back and beat Robert Emerson, beat Kyle Bradley, and even get a victory over Terry Edom via submission armbar. He did lose quite significantly to Clay Guida, where Clay actually broke his jaw. I remember watching that fight. Rafael chose not to continue on because his jaw was just, you know, shattered. He stopped that match. And he had a few ups and downs since then. But it seems after his loss to Gleison Tibau, he found a steady groove, winning 5 consecutive fights in a row, majority of them coming via this unanimous decision, but those involved wins over Donald Cerrone, those involved wins over Evan Dunham, and even Anthony Njokuani. Has fought a lot of the best, and that isn't even getting into the later tier of his career, where he pretty much only fights top 10 fighters. Now, he did take that very, very, very lopsided loss to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Again, in that fight, I am pretty sure that the record was set for most takedowns landed by Khabib. Of course, that's not something you want to pat yourself on the back, but it matters on how you pick yourself up afterwards. And since after that, you know, one-sided beatdown, and that was in April. If you look at this, he's fought 4 times in that same year. He started off taking that loss by Khabib Nurmagomedov in April. Then in June, he went and beat Jason High. Then in August, he beat Benson Henderson. And then he topped off that same year in December with a unanimous decision victory over Nate Diaz. After that, he was awarded his title fight against Anthony Pettis, where he won unanimously. He ended that year with a unanimous decision victory to claim that title. In 1 year, Rafael Dos Anjos went from being on one of the most lopsided losses to becoming the lightweight champion. And then he defended it against Don Cerrone in their second bout. Of course, he did not look promising in the Eddie Alvarez fight. Tony Ferguson was able to outpoint him, and Tony Ferguson looked phenomenal, even though Rafael Dos Anjos did have him hurt. That was the last straw for Rafael Dos Anjos to fight in the lightweight division, and he took his camp, he took himself to the welterweight, where he beat Tariq Saffiedine, he beat Neil Magny, and he beat former welterweight champion Robbie Lawler. Now, it was poised that Rafael Dos Anjos would be the number 1 contender if he were to beat Colby Covington. Of course, we know Colby Covington came in there with a game plan, came in there with grit and attitude and cardio, and Rafael Dos Anjos just did not have an answer for Colby and suffered that loss. But let's look at the fight metrics for both of these fighters, and let's make a pretty good comparison to what both of these men can offer. Now, I've clicked here and I put a side-by-side comparison of Rafael Dos Anjos versus the Nigerian Nightmare. And first things first, we look at the record. The experience is significant. It looks like Rafael Dos Anjos almost has 2 times the experience that Kamaru has, but the average fight time, Kamaru does, have more time in his box because of all those unanimous decision victories. Kamaru Usman also has almost a 5-inch height advantage. He has a 6-inch reach advantage, and the age is relatively the same. And if you look at the strikes, almost identical, except the part where it's the strikes absorbed per minute. Now, if we look at the strikes landed significant per minute, 3.71 for RDA and 3.64 for Kamaru Usman. The striking actually 44% to 48%, not much of a difference there. But it looks like Rafael Dos Anjos takes almost 2 times more significant strikes absorbed per minute. Now, that could be a downfall. We don't want to see Rafael Dos Anjos, or any fighter for that instance, take significant shots more than they have to, especially considering the fact that Kamaru Usman takes significantly less shots, primarily due to the reason that he doesn't like to stand and he takes the fight to the ground whenever he so chooses. And if you look at the defense, 64% to 63%, virtually identical. So let's look at the real aspect and what could really change and set the pace for this fight, and that's the grappling aspect. I mean, we have a takedown average per fight, 2.11 for Rafael Dos Anjos, which is a great number considering the fact that he's a very well-rounded fighter, versus that 3.85 that Kamaru Usman is able to land per fight. And that is just a significant jump. I mean, 3.85, almost 4. He lands those takedowns, and when he does, he typically keeps you down. That number would be more if it wasn't for how good he is at keeping his opponent down on the ground when he does take him. Now, the takedown accuracy, 40% to 47%. I expected that number from Usman to be a bit higher, but 47% is still a decent number. In that takedown defense, Kamaru Usman has yet to be taken down in his career with a takedown defense of 100% versus the very, very solid takedown defense of Rafael Dos Anjos at 64%. And of course, neither of these guys really go for submissions, even though Rafael Dos Anjos has significantly more victories via submission. Now, where am I going with this? Well, the strategy for Rafael Dos Anjos isn't going to be to engage in the grappling aspect with Kamaru Usman. I believe this is a fight that Rafael Dos Anjos needs to win if he were to get a title shot. He is approaching the end, maybe the end spectrum of his career, and we all know that not only does he want to get a welterweight title shot, but he is fully capable of getting a welterweight title shot at that. Engaging in a wrestling aspect with a man like Kamaru Usman is not the smart way to do that. Rafael Dos Anjos is going to have to keep this fight standing and keep this fight on the edge. Make sure he pressures Kamaru Usman. Make sure he keeps his distance at the same time and really, focus on striking on the outside and landing the significant strikes to land, hopefully, a shot that puts him out. But on the opposite end of that, if he is not careful, if he takes too many shots, if Kamaru Usman can play it off standing for a little bit, he may ploy Rafael Dos Anjos. He may hit him and then eventually take him down to the ground. And we saw that very similar aspect in the Colby Covington fight. Colby could land and hit him with a few shots, but in that gap where Rafael is defending, Colby would close that distance and take him down to the ground and just grapple him. And Rafael had no answer to these elite level wrestlers. But my overall prediction for this fight is I believe Kamaru Usman will be able to take this fight. He will be able to get the unanimous decision victory. And I believe this will propel him to fight for the title after Tyron Woodley and Colby Covington. But I do leave it to you guys. Who do you think is going to win this fight? Do you think the Brazilian Rafael Dos Anjos will win and get back into the title contention? Or do you think the Nigerian nightmare, Kamaru Usman, can continue his streak in the UFC and finally get his title shot? I'll leave it to you guys. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you support the channel, subscribe, like, do what you have to do. But as always, have a great day.